All rise for the Honorable Judge Holden.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. We are here today for the case of the state versus Mr. Ozzy Osbourne. Now, Mr. Osbourne here has been accused of many things. Satanic propaganda, animal cruelty, and general ballyhoo. Mr. Osbourne, how do you plead? Innocent. Oh, very well. Attorney Aloysius Tutt, you may begin your defense.
Your Honor, my client has been defamed by the tabloids, his name dragged through the mud in what I would call a smear campaign driven by the unscrupulous Moonset Gazette in an effort to do nothing more than tarnish his reputation based on pure conjecture.
Order! Order! That very well may be, Mr. Tutt, but how does your client explain songs with titles like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, or Lady Evil, or Die Young?
Your Honor, these are merely titles of songs. They're works of art. They don't have any grounds in reality whatsoever. I must appeal to your sensibilities, sir, to distinguish between fantasy and reality.
Mr. Tutt, I would ask you, does someone with good sense name their 1976 compilation album, quote, "We Sold Our Souls for Rock and Roll"? Because that sounds like an admittance of guilt to me.
Nonsense, Your Honor. Purely marketing. My client wouldn't hurt a fly.
Wouldn't hurt a fly. But he sure as hell would bite the head off an innocent bat. Now, you explain that to me, Mr. Aloysius Tutt.
Your Honor, the bat is one of the most deadly predators to the innocent fly. My client has the purest intentions at heart.
Oh my God, I never thought about it that way.
Your Honor, my client has requested to take the stand.
Well, this is quite unorthodox, but I'll allow it. You may begin, Mr. Osbourne. Order! Order! Mr. Osbourne, in all my years as Moonset Circuit Judge, I have never been so touched by someone's story. You, sir, are free to go. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you have arrived. You have arrived at the dark temple of Creep Street. Today, our 3-part series comes to its epic and metal conclusion here on Creep Street today. But first, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast. We've got a new TikTok, Creep Street Podcast. We're much more active there. That's something we're diving into. Also, it's a small part of our listeners, but we do have a dedicated listener base that listens to us only on YouTube. So what we're trying to do is we're kind of building out our YouTube a little bit. We've got playlists now of different genres, paranormal, UFO, conspiracy, true crime, that sort of stuff. And there's even a playlist of just the sketches. And on our Patreon, I've been writing articles as the character Marley Grimm, reporter at the Moonset Gazette there near Creep Street. I'm attempting to try and write 2 articles a month, and that is for all tiers of the Patreon. And then when the month rolls over, I will put the last month's ones on YouTube. And so it's just a way of kind of building out our portfolio and whatnot, but a lot of fun stuff happening. Also, check out, if you want to hear more of Gage's work, check out the YouTube channel Vaporverse. It's so fun. I've ripped some of his music and used it in little things we do. I mean, obviously we use all of his music in the show, but like sometimes for my own personal projects, I'll take stuff from Vaporverse and, pirate it. And there's a big lawsuit. Gage is trying to sue me for everything I've got. So
I'm just here on a professional level today. That's all.
It's a contractual obligation. But folks, let's dive in. Now, last week, he had moved on to the 60s, to the swinging, sexy 60s, where free love was running wild, and so was the occult. And the 2 biggest purveyors of it, 2 of the biggest bands in the world, especially at that time, was the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And, of course, we touch on other bands as well, but the Rolling Stones and the Beatles really had it on lock in the 1960s. But boy, oh boy. Let me tell you, if the parents were upset with Elvis shaking his hips and Mick Jagger doing his little chicken walk that he does, Paul McCartney saying, "I want to hold your hand," if that was bad enough, if parents were pissed about that, holy hell, were they not gonna like heavy metal? Because that's exactly where we're headed today, folks. Today's episode is Rock and Roll in the Occult, Volume 3, Heavy Metal Mephistopheles. Oh, yeah. Whoo, I feel the burn in my throat. Oh, smells of hellfire. Whoo,
I thought that was popcorn at first.
Whoo, man, the sulfur is burning tonight. My sources, I list them all at the beginning of part 1. Check out part 1, the very beginning. Let's kick back in on this story. As we know, while the Rolling Stones may have flirted with the occult, there was one British musician who took those dark ideas to heart, and then some. He was a man named Graham Bond, a rhythm and blues keyboardist and vocalist, and he didn't just dabble in the teachings of Aleister Crowley, he believed himself to be the great beast's illegitimate son. Once again, Great Beast was a nickname given to Aleister Crowley by his own mother. They say that if anyone can love you, it's your mom. Well, this boy was apparently, he was apparently quite a hellraiser, because even his mom referred to him as the Great Beast. But yes, Graham Bond not only was a follower of his writings, but claimed to be Aleister Crowley's illegitimate son. And to be clear, Crowley left no legal heirs. His acknowledged daughter tragically died in childhood, but Bond was utterly convinced of his lineage, and his obsession with the occult infused every corner of his music. And unlike Mick Jagger or Keith Richards, who, toyed with these ideas as a bit of, countercultural flair, Bond saw the occult as his truth. His album Holy Magic, that's magic with a K, and We Put Our Magic on You weren't just rhythm and blues records. They were rituals set to music. Songs like The Pentagram Ritual, The Magician, and The Judgment made no effort to mask their influences. Yeah, when your song is called The Pentagram Ritual, it's almost like mundane at that point.
It's just standard operating procedure. Here's your pentagram ritual.
Like if you read, I've never listened to their music because I was always too chicken and stuff, but do you remember the band? I think they're still around, Cannibal Corpse. And I just remember they were partly known for just the names of their songs alone are like the most disgusting hideous fucking things you can imagine. And so it's like, just reading the song titles, it's like, I've had enough. But some people love them, and I mean, all power to you. I mean,
yeah, I think I only heard of them because Jim Carrey is such a huge fan.
Really? So, but these songs, they were fully throated odes to Crowley's teachings. And Bond's work stood as one of the clearest musical bridges to the world of magic. And once again, that's magic with a K. And I think we've talked about it before, but just magic, just M-A-G-I-C, is like magic that you think of as like going to see a magician at a show or that sort of thing, or like that good feeling of, oh, it feels like magic or something. It's a way of expressing that feeling.
I think it's implicit that it's a performance.
Exactly.
That it's an illusion, whereas this seems to be implying that it's real.
Right. Magic spelled with a K typically means it's like the real deal. It's the real deal. But yet, despite Bond's talents and influence, he never reached the same level of fame as his contemporaries. His band, the Grand Bond Organization, maybe it's the name, the Graham Bond Organization, sounds like a law firm.
Yeah, Graham Bond got me a huge settlement.
Are you a victim of a workplace injury? Well, call Graham Bond Organization and we'll get you the settlement you deserve. But bland as the name was, the Graham Bond Organization is best known for the launching pad for Cream's legendary bassist Jack Bruce and drummer Ginger Baker, which Ginger Baker to this day is said to be maybe one of the greatest drummers of all time. Cream was, I mean, what was that? That was Eric Clapton as well, wasn't it? I mean, that was huge. In fact, I think they used to have because obviously, you know, Eric Clapton has probably had many different greatest hits albums that have been like repackaged over the years. But I always remember there was one, it was a greatest hits album called Cream of the Clapton. And it was just like the music he did with Cream. But I just thought that title was so funny. Cream of the Clapton.
That's a great title.
Oh, man.
Cream of the Clap.
Cream of the Clap. I got the clap. And it's creamy. But for Bond himself, the story is far darker. Now, while his music was steeped in the esoteric, his personal life was plagued by instability. Drug addiction, career setbacks, and worsening mental health created a spiral that he just could not escape. In 1974, at the age of only 36, Graham Bond ended his life by throwing himself under a London train. His death marked a tragic end to a man whose passion for the occult consumed him as much as it inspired him. And while Bond may have never reached the heights of fame, his music remains a haunting testament to his belief in the world of magic and his unwavering connection to its darkest corners. Wow.
Interesting that involving the train and the train tracks once again.
Yeah, once again, oh my God, you're right. And, you know, and I'm assuming in this instance, maybe they mean like, I don't know if it means like a subway train or something, but still, it is what we talked about in the first volume of this was they say that places of transition are often subjected to, for whatever reason, a higher level of hauntings. For example, the crossroads where you're just passing through, or at a hotel where you're not staying there, you're just passing through, or it could be a bus stop or a subway stop. So that makes sense. I mean, obviously not to tie this, you know, this man obviously suffered and we obviously that's horrible that he felt, you know, that was his only outlet and, you know, certainly empathize with the poor guy. But yeah, it's, you know, once again, that's the train thing, you know, coincidence or not. It's just, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. So now let's talk about Led Zeppelin. Now, Led Zeppelin, I know technically, maybe this is the common opinion, but I always thought that, like, Led Zeppelin, in my opinion, it seems like often is considered the early days of heavy metal, if not the generator or the project, or at least the ones that brought it mainstream, because they kind of made it palpable with that sort of blues rock. It's essentially like Yeah, it's like it's still based in the blues.
It's like the heaviest version of the blues.
Exactly. It's sort of like, I would say, one of the greatest in terms of blues rock today is Jack White. You can obviously hear the influence of Jimmy Page. And in fact, I think it was 2008, 2009, Jack White did an incredible documentary called It Might Get Loud. And it's him, Edge from U2, and Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. And the three of them, it's so cool because it's just the three of them sitting around discussing their methodology when it comes to playing guitar. Jack White has this very stripped down, he likes to strip things down to their barest of essentials. When we first learned of him, it was the White Stripes, just him and Meg White. And obviously, he's a solo act now and his band is much bigger, but still, it's rooted in those blues. And then you had Edge. It's almost like a science for him. As we know, U2 has such a big stadium sound. It makes you feel like you're rocketing into space sometimes. And he talks about his methodology, about how he loves pedals. He loves to combine pedals you wouldn't think would go to. He likes to like make these cool sounds, you know. And then Jimmy Page is kind of in the middle. He's more about just fucking rocking, you know what I mean? So it's an awesome documentary of three masters, but they have different styles. And yet at the same time, you can also see, even as different as they are, you can see the little things that unite them, like their love of folk music and the blues. And it's really cool. But anyway, yes, that's right, Led Zeppelin. Now, they were signed to Atlantic Records, and they were fiercely shielded by their larger-than-life manager, Peter Grant, who was a very big influence in the band, especially during these days. The band exploded onto the scene with a sound that was as massive as it was hypnotic. Their brand of heavy electric blues resonated deeply with a restless post-Sgt. Pepper generation, particularly in the United States, where they quickly built a rabid following. What set Led Zeppelin apart wasn't just their music, it was their mystique. Unlike their contemporaries, Zeppelin avoided the typical promotional circus. They didn't flood the airwaves with interviews. They didn't kowtow to press demands, and yet their records and ticket sales skyrocketed. This air of mystery only added to their allure, leaving fans hungry to know more about the band's enigmatic leader, Jimmy Page. And what Page revealed in his rare interviews was enough to fuel a storm of speculation. You see, for Page, music wasn't only his obsession, he had a deep and abiding fascination with the occult. In 1973, Page told a journalist, quote, "You can't ignore evil if you study the supernatural as I do. I have many books on the subject, and I've also attended a number of séances. I want to go on studying it." Okay, so sounds like he was in. Page's interests wasn't just a passing phase either. It was a dedication and a personal pursuit that even bled into Led Zeppelin's image and sound. From the mysterious symbols on their album covers to the otherworldly intensity of their live performances, Led Zeppelin exuded an aura of danger with mysticism. To their fans, Page was more than just a guitar god. He was a sorcerer, conjuring dark forces through his music. While Led Zeppelin dominated stages across Europe and the United States, whispers of Page's occult studies only deepened that ever-so-precious mystique. Fans dissected his every move, searching for hidden meanings and signs of arcane knowledge in the band's lyrics and artwork. Page wasn't just a rock star to these folks. No, he was a figure of intrigue, a man who seemed to straddle the line between reality and the supernatural. And for a generation that was hungry for rebellion and mystery and a touch of the forbidden, Led Zeppelin delivered all three in boatloads. Their music wasn't just loud, baby, it was transcendent. And their leader wasn't just talented, no, he was charismatic, he was enigmatic. He was a man with one foot firmly planted in the world of rock and the other in the shadowy realms of the occult. Now, by the 1970s, Led Zeppelin was firmly planted at the summit of the rock world. Their albums sold in the millions, their concerts packed stadiums, and their music had become the soundtrack for a generation. But along with the fame came an aura of darkness, a reputation steeped in mystery, and no one embodied that mystique more than, of course, guitarist Jimmy Page. Now, while Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham shared in the band's staggering success, none of them had any particular affinity for Page's obsession with the occult. But as Zeppelin's frontman and visionary, Page's interests cast a long shadow, and each band member, in one way or another, found themselves tarnished by association. For Page, the occult wasn't just a passing curiosity, it was a passion. By 1970, flush with Zeppelin royalties and concert earnings, he took his fascination to the next level. Page wasn't just collecting Aleister Crowley books and memorabilia anymore. Oh, no. He went so far as to purchase one of Crowley's former residences. Think back to last week's episode, the infamous Boleskine House on the shores of Scotland's Loch Ness. If we remember, that was the house that Aleister Crowley had bought, and it had attempted this very dangerous ritual, which he did not complete. And it says if it is not completed, that essentially demonic forces will get you. Jimmy Page bought that very house. So once again, Crowley, he's got his fingers in everything, even after death. This guy is everywhere. You see, the Boleskine House was not just any property. It had a history as chilling as the loch itself. Of course, as we know, Crowley had once used the estate as a base for his magical rituals, including a lengthy and controversial operation meant to summon guardian angels and banish demons. Well, for Page, owning the house was like owning a piece of occult history, a tangible connection to Crowley's legacy. But Page's tributes to Crowley didn't stop there. That year, he and engineer Terry Manning left their mark on the band's third studio album, Led Zeppelin III, in a way that only deepened the band's dark reputation. Instead of the standard serial numbers, the first vinyl pressings of the album were inscribed with Crowley's famous creed, "Do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law." To some, it was just a curious Easter egg, the way we might watch a movie trailer today and look for Easter eggs. To some people, it was nothing more than that, just kind of like it just made the album a little more fun. But to others, oh, it was a signal. It was a signal. It was like QAnon. A declaration. For them, it was a declaration that Zeppelin wasn't just dabbling in the occult, but embracing it. And with the band already dominating the rock scene, it didn't take much for fans and critics alike to start drawing connections between Page's personal beliefs and Zeppelin's rise to superstardom. What could it have been the result of some sort of infernal pact? Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? Only Jimmy knows. Well, by now, Jimmy Page, he was more than just a guitarist. He was a figure of intrigue, as we said, a man whose fascination with the occult had become inseparable from the band's identity. Whether the rest of Zeppelin wanted it or not, that is, as their legacy was now tangled with the shadows of Crowley and the mystique of Boleskine House. And for their audience, it only made the band's music and their mythos all the more irresistible. By 1971, Led Zeppelin was at the height of their power, and their fourth album, often considered their magnum opus, cemented their legend. In true Zeppelin fashion, the album had no formal title. Instead, it was marked by 4 mysterious symbols, each representing a band member. These sigils weren't just decorative, they added an eerie and otherworldly layer to Zeppelin's already shadowy reputation. Jimmy Page's symbol, the most cryptic of them all, resembles the word Zoso. Now, quick side note, Fans who have been listening to this show for a while will know that Halloween, I think 2023, we did Zozo, because there apparently is a demon named Zozo, Z-O-Z-O. This more looks like Zoso, but actually many people who have played with the Ouija board and whatnot have reported coming in contact with a Zozo all across the world. Like people who don't even know each other or had heard of that name pops up. So Zoso, I don't know, maybe it's something else, who knows? But very fascinating. It resembles, it's very close to that demonic name. Fans and occult enthusiasts alike were immediately drawn to its strange and unreadable design, and sparking decades of speculation. Eventually, connections were traced to the Renaissance Italian astrologer and mathematician Girolamo Cardano, who lived from 1490 to 1565, and two 19th century French occult texts, Les Triple Vocabulaire Infernal and Les Dragons Rouges. If Page's symbol was meant to evoke an air of mystery and esoteric power, well, baby, it worked like a charm. Now, Robert Plant, the lead singer, his symbol was a feather encircled by a ring, and it had its own mystical story. The design, he claimed, represented the lost Pacific kingdom of Mu, spelled M-U, a mythical land that some believe predates Atlantis, and this was actually new to me. I cannot wait to look this up, because obviously Atlantis is a Creep Street episode that we will eventually do. Mu, I had never heard of this, and I'm going to have to look that up. The symbol's meaning fit Plant's ethereal presence, aligning with his fascination with mythology and ancient lore. But the album's mysticism didn't stop with those symbols. The gatefold of Led Zeppelin 4 featured a haunting illustration of the Hermit card from the iconic 1910 Rider-Waite Tarot deck. The image, an old man holding a lantern perched atop a lonely mountain, perfectly captured the album's tone, blending isolation, wisdom, and a sense of searching for something that was just out of reach. This combination of these symbols and imagery created an aura that was impossible to ignore. Fans would obsess and dissect every detail, convinced that the album was more than just mere music. It was a portal to deeper truths or perhaps darker forces. For Zeppelin, the ambiguity wasn't just intentional, it was the point. By refusing to name the album or explain the symbols, they invited their audience into a world of mystery and speculation, blurring the line between art, myth, and magic. To this day, the symbols of Led Zeppelin 4 remain iconic, their meanings tantalizingly out of reach. And for Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and the rest of the band, that air of mystery was the perfect spell, one that ensured Zeppelin's legend would only grow with time. And Gage, that's something we've talked about, starting with Robert Johnson of, you know what, I might not actually be that person, but because there is already this I'm going to lean into it. It's leaning into the gimmick.
Absolutely. Another just recurring theme.
Right. It's because if people are putting it on you, it's because they want to see you like that. They don't want to know that, oh, Jimmy Page is a guy who, goes to McDonald's like everyone else and has a mortgage and stuff. No, that's part of the fun. It's like pro wrestling. Yes, we know the people in the ring aren't actually trying to hurt each other. Now, they're incredible athletes and they do obviously get hurt very often. But the point is you suspend that disbelief and you allow yourself to believe that these are two people literally trying to kill each other. It's the same thing with a movie. You suspend your disbelief. And I think that's part of what this is that people want the mystery. They prefer the legend over the mundane.
Absolutely. It's a fun fantasy in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's in many ways, unless it's like you're branded as like some sort of pariah, but it really is a blessing in that way. You get to essentially live a second life, but not one that's hidden away, not a hidden life, but it's essentially giving you something that will last after you're gone, which I think is what many of us even if we don't know it, is what we secretly want, is that there will be something we leave behind. It could be our children, it could be a piece of work. We want something that lasts beyond us, that was a part of us. And these sorts of things are like that. Robert Johnson's been dead for many, many years, but we sure know about the devil at the crossroads. So, by the mid-1970s, Jimmy Page's obsession with the occult was no longer just a fascination. It was practically a cornerstone of Zeppelin's identity. In '74, Page made his ties to the mystical world even more tangible by purchasing the Equinox, a London occult bookshop named after Aleister Crowley's own influential publication. But the shop wasn't just a place to buy rare books, it also served as the hub for Page's occult publishing ventures, cementing his role as both a collector and a curator of forbidden knowledge. That same year, Page also acquired Tower House, a neo-Gothic masterpiece designed by architect William Burgess in London's posh Kensington district. With its lavish, otherworldly aesthetic, the house seemed the perfect home for someone who walked the line between rock god and occult scholar. When Led Zeppelin launched their boutique record label Swan Song in 1974, the occult influence was impossible to miss. Invitations to the label's launch party boldly bore the Crowleyan creed, "Do what thou wilt," and the party itself was a spectacle worthy of the band's decadent reputation, complete with strippers dressed as nuns. The company's logo, a winged figure resembling the mythical Icarus, or as some believed, Lucifer himself, only deepened the connection between Zeppelin and the shadowy world of mysticism. Now, by this point, Jimmy Page had fully embraced his role as a figure of dark intrigue. During the band's 1975 and 77 tours, Page took the stage in a black suit embroidered with the astrological symbol, his cryptic Zoso sigil, and a coiling full-length dragon. It wasn't just a costume, it was a declaration, a visual representation of Page's connection to the esoteric. Now, the mystique carried over to Zeppelin's cinematic venture, The Song Remains the Same, made in 1976. In one memorable scene, Page appeared alone on the wooded grounds of his English estate, staring directly into the camera as his eyes glowed with an eerie, supernatural light. The scene was brief, but it left an impression, portraying Page as more than just a musician. He was a sorcerer, a man in touch with forces far beyond ordinary comprehension. Even Zeppelin's outdoor Knebworth concerts in 1979 had an air of the arcane. Before the gigs, Page visited the nearby mansion that had once been home to Edward Bulwer Lytton, the Earl of Knebworth. Bulwer Lytton, a Victorian writer and mystic, was known for his occult-themed works and theories about hidden energies and ancient knowledge. For Page, the visit wasn't just a curiosity, it was an investigation into the lingering echoes of a man whose interests mirrored his own. By the late 1970s, Jimmy Page had elevated himself to the role of rock's preeminent occultist, incorporating the mysticism we all know and love into Zeppelin's music, their image, and their mythology. To fans, he was not just the guitarist, of course, he was a keeper of secrets, a man whose artistry seemed to blur the lines between reality and magic. By the mid-1970s, the mighty Led Zeppelin were beginning to unravel. Trouble was a-brewing in their camp, and no amount of black magic or rock and roll swagger could stop it. In 1975, tragedy struck when Robert Plant and his wife were seriously injured in a devastating car accident. Just 2 years later, in 1977, Plant faced an even greater heartbreak when his young son passed away from a sudden infection. The band's infamous excesses also began to take a darker toll. During an Oakland concert that same year, John Bonham, Peter Grant, and 2 members of Zeppelin's road crew were arrested for a backstage assault. dragging the band's reputation further into the mud. And by this time, Page was sinking deeper into the grip of a cocaine and heroin addiction, his once commanding presence now overshadowed by his own vices. His growing dependency only added fuel to an already volatile situation. It was around this period that Page's relationship with Kenneth Anger, I think we remember that guy, that SOB from the last episode, Kenneth Anger, a figure as mysterious and controversial as Page himself, their relationship completely imploded. The two had first crossed paths at an auction of Aleister Crowley's artifacts, where Page, flush with those Zeppelin royalties, outbid the cash-strapped Anger for some coveted items. Now, despite this tense introduction, the two struck up a partnership, and Page, agreeing to compose a soundtrack for Anger's occult opus Lucifer Rising, free of charge. But the collaboration was doomed from the start. Page was consumed by his drug habit and band responsibilities, and repeatedly delayed delivering the music. Anger, in the meantime, had set up shop in the basement of Page's tower house, using the space as an editing room for the film. To make matters worse, Anger began inviting visitors into the house for unauthorized tours, a move that infuriated Page. Yeah, this Kenneth Anger guy sounds like a douche, and it's so funny that he showed up in the Beatles and Stones episode. It's like this guy is like a parasite. He's like, if this was 2025, he'd be the guy trying to get them to start a meme coin, some sort of a crypto thing. Like, he'd be the guy who like screws them and essentially does a pump and dump, like that Hawk Tuah coin or whatever, the most recent one.
Right. A rug pull.
You're right. That's exactly. Kenneth Anger would so be into crypto. I just feel it. I know.
100%.
And here's the thing. The concept of crypto, it's not that I think eventually everything will go crypto. Everything will be digital. I think it's just, it's early on and there's a lot of bad actors in the field, but eventually I think it will go that way. So that wasn't me knocking crypto or taking some sort of a political stance, of course.
No, just the people who use it for the wrong reasons.
Now, by 1976, the tension between Page and Anger had reached a breaking point. Anger publicly severed ties with Page, blasting him in the press for his drug use and delays. Never one to shy away from theatrics, Anger even threatened to unleash what he called a, quote, Kenneth Anger curse on the guitarist. Anger finally premiered Lucifer Rising in 1980, but Page's contributions had been scrapped entirely. Instead, the film's haunting soundtrack was credited to Bobby Beausoleil, an imprisoned murderer and member of the infamous Charles Manson family. The finished film was as surreal as its backstory, featuring shots of Anger himself, a heavily drugged Marianne Faithfull, and even Mick Jagger's brother Chris. For Page, the fallout with Anger was just one more fracture in the already crumbling Zeppelin empire. And by the late 70s, the band's dark aura, once a symbol of power and mystique, had turned into something much more chaotic and self-destructive, and the legend of Led Zeppelin grew darker still. By 1980, the mighty Led Zeppelin had reached the end of its journey. The official announcement of their breakup came just months after the tragic death of drummer John Bonham, who drank himself to death during a binge at Jimmy Page's Windsor home. Bonham's death wasn't the first shadow to fall over the band. Just a year earlier, another young friend of Page's was found dead of an accidental overdose at his Sussex residence. By this point, whispers of a, quote, Zeppelin curse had started to take root. Fans, conspiracy theorists, and even religious zealots latched on to the band's dark reputation, and the mysterious aura surrounding them only deepened. The most famous of these claims centered around their magnum opus, Stairway to Heaven. Rumor had it that if you played that composition backwards, you could hear subliminal messages, phrases that some believed were straight out of Satan's own playbook. Among the supposed reversed lyrics were eerie lines like, "There is no escaping. Whose path will make me sad? Whose power is Satan? He will give you 666. Here's to my sweet Satan. The rumors reached a fever pitch with accusations of, quote, backward masking, even making their way to a committee hearing of the California state legislature in 1982. It wasn't just fans and evangelicals who believed something sinister was afoot. No. By now, the British tabloids and American rock magazines had started to print stories about the Zeppelin curse, linking the band's extraordinary success to the alleged pact that Jimmy Page had made with the devil himself. The tale went a little something like this. Page, in his obsession with the occult and teachings of Aleister Crowley, had made a Faustian bargain. In exchange for Led Zeppelin's meteoric rise to fame, he supposedly sold his soul, along with the souls of Robert Plant and John Bonham, to the devil. The one exception? John Paul Jones, the quiet, grounded bassist who refused to sign the infernal contract. According to the legend, Jones's refusal was the reason he escaped the tragedies and misfortunes that plagued the others. You know, I hope that Plant and Bonham, I hope they signed off on that.
Yeah.
Which one of those? It was one of the early composers, remember? Their mom supposedly sold their soul so that their son...
Yeah.
It was like, come on, Mom. It's like, first of all, I mean, it's like I didn't make that choice. But I love that there's just one guy. What I love is he still gets to be in the band, still gets to enjoy being in Led Zeppelin. He just doesn't have to sell his soul.
Right.
It's just so great. The band's perplexing album covers and Plant's mystical lyrics and their thunderous records and live shows and, of course, their notorious offstage antics all contributed to the mythology. But at the heart of it all, of course, was old Jimmy Page. His fascination with the occult, his collection of Crowley artifacts, and his ownership of the infamous Boleskine House on Loch Ness. To fans, the rumors only made Zeppelin's legacy more compelling and added an otherworldly layer to their music. But to their critics, the band had become a cautionary tale of excess and hubris, a group that climbed too high and paid the price for their audacious reach. Zeppelin may have disbanded, but their legend, dark, mysterious, and larger than life, continues to loom like a shadow over the world of rock and roll. I mean, still, they're probably... few bands are as influential. Led Zeppelin was truly an icon. Now, by 1976, Jimmy Page had grown weary of the more outlandish rumors surrounding his connection to the occult. Speaking to Rolling Stone magazine that year, Page made his position clear, saying, quote, "I do not worship the devil, but magic does intrigue me, magic of all kinds." Still, Page wasn't about to let the mystique he'd carefully cultivated go to waste. No, because he continued by saying, quote, "I'm not about to deny any of the stories. I'm no fool. I know how much the mystique matters. Why should I blow it now? See, that's a guy who knows. He gets it. He gets it."
He basically confirms it right there.
Right.
That it is about the persona more than it is about the facts necessarily.
To quote a popular phrase, he said the quiet part out loud, essentially. But after the death of Robert Plant's child in 1977 and the subsequent explosion of the Zeppelin curse myth, Page became more adamant in his denials. Speaking to Melody Maker, he expressed his frustrations, saying, quote, "The whole concept of the band is entertainment. I don't see any link between that and karma. And yet I've seen it written a few times about us, like yet another incident in Zeppelin's karma. It's a horrible, tasteless thing to say." And you know what, that is true, especially if you're talking about a kid, a child that, it's all fun and, like if there's legends about, especially when you're talking about a kid dying, it's like, have a little tact. Even if there was a curse and a curse was responsible, it's like, have a little tact. You know what I mean? You don't...
Absolutely. the person probably is having these thoughts anyway. And, it reminds me of Robert Johnson with them blaming him for the death of, was it his wife?
Yes, his wife and unborn child.
Saying that his music was the reason that she passed. I mean, that is just tasteless.
I mean, what a cruel... Because you have to think, for Johnson, I mean, you are already in such a low, an unfathomable low of grief, and then the fingers turn at you? Like...
Right. Nobody's more upset about it than you. And now they're trying to blame you?
I would almost find it hard not to, like, physically attack them. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's just like...
That'd be infuriating.
That would be so... It would almost be like... It would take me a while to even... What? It would just be...
It's an astounding accusation.
Yeah. Jesus. Anyway, but back to the story. Page, of course, has never denied his fascination with Crowley and the study of mysticism. Many believe he still is a practicing Thelemite and maintains ties with Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, which means Order of the Temple of the East. A Thelemite is someone who practices Thelema, the religion made by Aleister Crowley. Yet, in a 2003 interview with Guitar World, Page tried to put things in perspective, saying, quote, "It's unfortunate that my studies of mysticism and Eastern and Western traditions of magic and Tantricism have all come under the umbrella of Crowley. Yeah, sure, I read a lot of Crowley and was fascinated by his techniques and ideas, but I was reading across the board. It wasn't unusual in the 60s to be interested in comparative religions and magic." Even well into retirement, Page has had to battle against the allegations that followed Zeppelin during their peak. The infamous stories of curses, backward masking, and Stairway to Heaven, and satanic connections have refused to die. In 1995, Page told reporters, quote, "I don't want to get into too many backlashes from Christian fundamentalist groups. I've given those people too much mileage already." And in 2000, Page successfully sued a London magazine that accused him of casting satanic spells over John Bonham on the night of his death. The story was retracted, and Page donated the damages he received to charity. Well, there you go. Wow.
Well, he got some justice in the end.
Yeah, and he gave it away, gave it to charity. That was nice.
Which really elevates him. I mean, that puts him in such a position of moral superiority, to handle it that way was probably the absolute best way to handle it.
Right. Or if you donated it to the Church of Satan or something, as an FU, that would be...
That'd be just the biggest middle finger.
Right, because it's their money too. So it's like their money's going to fund the,
good job. Look what happened in the long run.
Yeah. But folks, so... If you thought Jimmy Page and Zeppelin was where that ended, oh, no. Because as we move forward in history, people push the boundaries more and more. You see, while Zeppelin's mystique was built up gradually over the band's career and beyond, their reputation for darkness and controversy was always looming in the background. But in 1969, as Zeppelin was still on the rise, they shared Los Angeles concert bills with a different act. One that brought its own brand of shock and scandal to the stage.
Alice Cooper.
Initially a full band promoted by the ever-eccentric Frank Zappa, the Alice Cooper act was a far cry from Zeppelin's technical wizardry and cult intrigue. Instead, they fused raucous electric boogie music with a ghoulish theatricality that would eventually earn the label shock rock. At the center of it all was a young Vincent Furnier, who was more than willing to lean into the group's more macabre image. It wasn't long before Furnier fully adopted the name Alice Cooper, claiming, perhaps tongue firmly in cheek, that it had come to him during a session with a Ouija board. According to the story, the board revealed that he was the reincarnation of a 17th century witch named Alice Cooper. The combination of raw energy and theatrical horror made Alice Cooper an instant sensation, shocking audiences with his over-the-top stage antics and eerie mythos. Where Led Zeppelin whispered about the occult, Alice Cooper screamed it from the stage, building an entirely different kind of legend. And fun fact, I think maybe we've talked about it before, but one of the very first conventions Creep Street ever went to, it was in Chicago. It was the Days of the Dead Horror Con, and there was tons of cool people there, but we were just a few booths away from Alice Cooper.
Oh, wow.
And he seemed like a very friendly guy. Was genuinely kind to people. Like if they wanted to, like if they were big fans and wanted, he didn't just like go, okay, I gotta sign the next. He would like sit and listen to them and, you know, give people hugs. Yeah, he seemed like a really cool dude. So
that's awesome.
For whatever it's worth, I saw him at a convention at the Rosemont Holiday or wherever it was in the suburbs of Chicago.
You vouched for him.
I vouched for him. And I saw Billy Zane. Billy Zane was the coolest. All right. Now, by the early 70s, Alice Cooper had become the ultimate shock rock sensation, delivering performances that were so over the top, audiences left with their heads spinning. They were decked out in heavy makeup and even women's clothing. Cooper would prowl the stage like a deranged ghoul, and his props, a live boa constrictor draped around his neck. Baby dolls he would gleefully dismember before the horrified audiences, and macabre rituals that saw him executed by noose or guillotine in climactic finales. His set lists weren't exactly soothing fare, with songs like Dead Babies, I Love the Dead, Black Widow, and the necrophiliac anthem, Cold Ethel. Cooper wasn't just performing songs, he was crafting a grotesque spectacle that left fans captivated and critics clutching their pearls. You know, it is interesting. You know, we were talking about Cannibal Corpse earlier, that came up, and like, you know, these songs, just the titles alone that are just so like, I mean, now these aren't nearly as bad, obviously, as Cannibal Corpse, but you can tell like Dead Babies, like that's for the time, that was pretty wild. And it makes you wonder, where's the line between, because it's art, obviously, it's almost like, it's more of a theatrical performance, like a musical, really. Even though it's musicians, it seems like Alice Cooper was almost more of like a Broadway production in a way. The song Dead Baby sounds like it comes from a musical, doesn't it? Like, it sounds like a song that explains a situation or a scene, like from Sweeney Todd or something. I love the name Cold Ethel. That makes me, it's like, oh God, like a necrophilic Cold Ethel. That is just awful.
Yeah, I think it depends on what the intent is. Because it's obvious when people are just trying to be provocateurs, sometimes obvious, sometimes not so obvious, when there's actually a message behind it. But in the case of Alice Cooper, obviously, like we mentioned, he's very theatrical. I don't think he was meant to be taken as literally or as seriously. It was more, this is a show, and it's a show that is dark. It is a dark, occult type show. And so these things all play into that theme.
Exactly, right. It's not just a band playing a concert, it's like almost like a theatrical production in a weird way. And then, of course, there were his albums. Love It to Death, Killer, Welcome to My Nightmare, and Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. With titles like these, it's no wonder that Cooper became rock's favorite boogeyman. For parental groups and mainstream commentators, Cooper was public enemy number one. A rock star who seemed to revel in stomping all over society's boundaries. And the rumors, obviously, didn't hurt his legend either. One persistent folktale claimed that Cooper had won an onstage, quote, gross-out contest with Frank Zappa, which, depending on who tells the story, involved publicly producing and ingesting bodily waste. Cooper and Zappa both denied the tale, but by then the story had taken on a life of its own. The press just couldn't get enough, and parental outrage only fueled the fire. Well.
I mean, that's pretty extreme just to win a quote, competition.
That is pretty extreme. That is pretty extreme. Wow.
I mean, was it worth it? If it actually happened, was it worth it? But I tend to think that it may not have. That it was another form of perpetuating the legend.
Right.
The mythos, rather than something that actually occurred.
Like a band that I've actually never heard their music, but I'm aware of them. Gwar. They're that band that like dress up in these huge costumes and like spray blood on the, like it's fake blood, but they'll do like, and like the audience will go home drenched in like blood and bile. And
they're like the darker version of the Blue Man Group.
Exactly. Right. In 1971, Life magazine music critic Albert Goldman summed up the reaction to Alice Cooper's act, saying, quote, "The advance publicity for Alice Cooper almost turned my stomach. It's a frightening embarrassment. What gets everybody uptight is the sacrifice he makes of shame." But Cooper didn't shy away from the backlash. In fact, he leaned into it, saying, "We are the group that drove a stake through the heart of the love generation," he told reporters with a grin that was equal parts glee and menace. For a few chaotic years, Cooper was the undisputed king of rock and roll ugliness. He wasn't just a musician, he was a provocateur, a carnival barker of the grotesque who thrived on outrage and turned controversy into an art form, kind of like what we were saying. The controversy was the art in a way. Now, by the mid-1970s, Alice Cooper, the man, not the character, was starting to peel back the layers of his notorious persona. He never disavowed the wild theatrics of his shock rock empire, but it was becoming clear that the blood-soaked image of Alice Cooper was exactly what it seemed. It was a gimmick. It was brilliant and profitable, but at the end of the day, it was a gimmick that just happened to captivate America's disaffected teenagers and piss off their parents. Offstage, though, Cooper's life was far from the satanic drug-fueled chaos that many assumed. He was, in reality, the son of a minister from Phoenix, Arizona, a functioning alcoholic with a sharp wit and a surprising love of golf. That's right, Alice Cooper was frequently competing in celebrity golf tournaments, rubbing elbows with old-school entertainers like Groucho Marx and Bob Hope. For all his decapitations and boa constrictors on stage, Alice Cooper in his downtime was more like Mr. Rogers than a demonic high priest. But still, of course, casual observers couldn't help but lump old Cooper in with the cresting occult wave of the 70s. His over-the-top lyrics and style practically invited the comparison. But those closer to him obviously knew the truth. Cooper was just a character, a role that Vincent Furnier played to perfection. Journalist Bob Greene chronicled this duality in 1974 in his book Billion Dollar Baby, which documented Cooper's American tour, saying, quote, "He was aware that much of America took his sick, blood-soaked image very seriously indeed, which made him all the more willing to laugh at himself." In the studio, Cooper went out of his way to remind everyone that his sinister onstage persona was just that, a persona. Continuing writing, Greene said, "He was not mistaking himself for the dangerous wretch named Alice Cooper that was being sold to the public." Now, I mean, like, I think it's cool that Cooper actually was like very open about that. Even when they were recording, just like, hey, just so you know, because you know what, even though I didn't talk to him, he did seem like a regular dude. He did have the makeup, he had some of the makeup on and stuff, but he was just a regular dude and he seemed very friendly. Of course, we also have to remember, this all was hitting at the right time. The 70s saw a huge resurgence of what's called good old satanic panic. With films, it wasn't just music, it was films like The Exorcist, which really was the kickoff, and films like Rosemary's Baby and all that stuff. The 70s was a huge, huge time for claims of demonic possession and whatnot, and this was hitting at a time when it seemed all too real, you know?
Yeah, which it seems like a natural evolution from what came before it, that it would peak kind of in the 70s.
Right, exactly. Now, meanwhile, as Alice Cooper ruled the shock rock scene, one of his opening acts was a band with a very different approach to dark spectacle, Blue Oyster Cult. This East Coast group didn't rely on guillotines and gory effects. Their heavy rock sound carried its own brand of mystique with lyrics that were often tongue-in-cheek and packed with cryptic references. Though their name was a little off-kilter, the band's intensity on stage was undeniable. Laser beams and exploding flash pots were staples of their live shows, adding an element of cosmic wonder to the band's heavy rock. Much of their mystique can be credited to producer, manager, and co-songwriter Sandy Pearlman. A university graduate and occasional music critic, Pearlman wasn't your typical rock impresario. He's even credited with coining the term, quote, heavy metal to describe the aggressive, guitar-driven sound that bands like Blue Oyster Cult were perfecting. But the Cult's connection to the broader rock landscape did not stop there. Keyboardist Alan Lanier formed an unlikely link between the band's stadium-shaking rock and the cerebral bohemianism of the punk movement through his relationship with Patti Smith, another wonderful rock icon, considered by many to be the punk poetess and the keyboardist made for an unexpected pairing, bridging the two seemingly opposite worlds with their partnership. In many ways, Blue Oyster Cult was a study in contrasts. Serious musicianship paired with a sly wink, theatrical performances without tipping into parody, and heavy rock with a touch of highbrow intrigue. And while they never matched the outrageousness of Alice Cooper's live shows, they carved out their own unique space in the mid-70s rock scene, a place where mystery and spectacle and humor could coexist under the glow of laser lights. Now, following in the footsteps of Led Zeppelin, Blue Oyster Cult leaned heavily into a mysterious occult-laced image, creating an aura that was obviously, like I said, mysterious and captivating. Their album covers were works of art in their own right, and each one was layered with cryptic visuals that seemed to hint at hidden meanings. Their 1972 self-titled debut featured surreal, MC Escher-inspired graphics that seemed to defy logic. The following year's album, Tyranny and Mutation, kept the vibe alive, but things took a darker turn with 1974's Secret Treaties, which sported a Luftwaffe jet fighter, a stark, menacing image that felt both provocative and ominous. And then there came 1975's live album, On Your Feet or On Your Knees, where a sinister black limousine loomed in front of an old church under a storm-ravaged sky. On Your Feet or On Your Knees. What an album title.
That is a great album title. Really conveys being either on top or at the bottom.
Yeah.
The highest of highs or the lowest of lows.
Now, what tied these otherworldly album covers together was a reoccurring symbol, an arcane logo that was said to represent the scythe of Cronus, leader of the Titans in Greek mythology. But that wasn't all. The logo also doubled as the alchemical symbol for lead, the heaviest of metals, making it a fitting emblem for a band that was helping define what heavy metal truly meant. It meant lead poisoning. Like Jimmy Page's Zoso, the symbol became a virtual trademark for the band, adopted by legions of fans who wore it on shirts and patches and accessories of all kinds. It was a sort of a badge of initiation into the Blue Oyster Cult's esoteric world. Even their band's name, with the intimidating umlaut over the oyster, it's those two dots that's over the O, added a touch of theatrical menace. While the accent mark was essentially meaningless, it sparked a trend, influencing future heavy metal acts like Motley Crue and Motorhead, who used it to conjure a similar air of aggression and mystery. I had no idea. That was pretty fascinating. I totally forgot about that. But Blue Oyster Cult's songs mirrored their album art. Vaguely sinister, science fiction tinged, and always walking the line between transgressive and playful. Tracks like Dominance and Submission, Subhuman, Tattoo Vampire, Career of Evil, and Astronomy captured a vibe that was part gothic horror, part pulp sci-fi. And of course, who could forget Godzilla with its thunderous riff that turned the iconic Tokyo-destroying kaiju into a stadium-shaking rock anthem. But it was their 1976 single, Don't Fear the Reaper, that truly cemented Blue Oyster Cult as masters of the macabre. Written by guitarist Donald Roser under his cooler-than-cool pseudonym Buck Dharma. The song was a ghostly, minor key ballad about a lover's suicide pact. With whispery arpeggios and haunting vocals, it painted an eerie scene of Death himself, waiting just outside the window, cloaked in shadow and candlelight. In fact, I can't remember who does it. In the first Scream movie, there's a cover, like an acoustic cover of Don't Fear the Reaper. And it's kind of like this moment between Sydney and her boyfriend earlier on. It's so good, but it's like a slow, like acoustic version. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I don't even remember that in the movie, but next time I watch those, I'm going to listen for that, because that's a great song choice for that. And I love, too, when movies, I think they do this a lot of times to pay less in copyright, is they'll use a cover version rather than the original. But a lot of times it works really well, and it makes it a little more subtle, a little less on the nose as well.
You're right, especially, the Scream came out in 96. They probably got an artist that was a little more of that time. And it's great. If you're looking for it in the movie, it's when you first meet Billy. It's when you see Neve Campbell. It's after What's-Her-Face, Drew Barrymore gets killed, and then it cuts to Sydney's house, and Billy sneaks in, and they talk. It's so that her dad doesn't hear him. They turn on the radio. And in the back, it's diegetically.
That scene.
Yeah, it's supposed to be diegetic music.
Hey, I love that you know the term diegetic.
Yes. For the folks at home, maybe we've already discussed this, but diegetic, when music in a movie is diegetic, it means it's actually happening in the world of the movie and the characters can hear it. Like maybe they turn on the radio or they get in a bar fight and someone hits the jukebox and that sort of thing. Whereas like a score or just a song that's playing over like, say, maybe a montage, that is not diegetic. We're not supposed to believe that the characters are hearing that music, essentially. So, Don't Fear the Reaper became an anthem of gothic passion and shadowy power, as the track itself is still timeless as Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. It wasn't just a hit, baby, it was a cultural touchstone quoted in everything from Stephen King's apocalyptic epic, The Stand, to the televised adaptation of Norman Mailer's The Executioner's Song. And I'm surprised my sources didn't mention this, but it's also the song they play in the cowbell sketch in SNL. They're
of course.
They're Blue Oyster Cult, and because there is a cowbell in that song. Obviously, in the song, it sounds much better, but that's the whole bit, right?
That sketch even has become synonymous with that song, I would say.
And it also, think about this. When that sketch happened, that song was already at least 20 years old. So it was still even popular enough that people got it then, and it would still be popular now. Maybe because of, that sketch probably kind of gave that song a resurgence, I'm sure, in a way.
Oh, I'm sure. Don't blow this for us, Gene!
Then just Jimmy Fallon laughing in the background. The album it came from, Agents of Fortune, was another showcase of Blue Oyster Cult's knack for cryptic imagery, featuring their signature Cronus logo, alongside arcane tarot card designs and lyrics co-written by the punk poetess, once again, Miss Patti Smith. The record was a gateway to the mysterious for countless fans, and for a generation of young rock and rollers, Don't Fear the Reaper and other Blue Oyster Cult songs were like stepping into a world of the occult. Accessible yet indecipherable. Catchy yet endlessly confounding. The music pulled the listeners into a realm where science fiction, mysticism, and rock and roll collided in spectacular fashion. By the late 60s and through the 70s, hard rock and heavy metal had fully embraced the occult, either as a genuine fascination or as a clever marketing ploy. For some bands, the connection was unmistakable and was woven directly into their music and stage acts. Take Black Widow, a British progressive rock group with song titles like Attack of the Demon, The Conjuration, and Come to the Sabbath. Their live shows were infamous for onstage rituals that featured the sacrifices, quote, sacrifices, of nude women, a spectacle that blurred the line between performance and occult theater. On the other side of the Atlantic in '69, the Chicago-based psychedelic folk group Coven made waves with their odes to witchcraft and the dark arts. Their music was steeped in eerie atmospheres and black magic themes. And here's the kicker. Whether by pure coincidence or something else, Their bassist was a man named Oz Osbourne. Not that Ozzy Osbourne, but the name alone added a strange, almost predestined layer of mystique. Both Black Widow and Coven were committed to their dark imagery, perhaps a little too committed, which limited their mainstream appeal. But they did pave the way for later bands who would adopt occult trappings with just the right mix of sincerity and spectacle to capture massive audiences. Now, this is interesting. Now we're going to talk about some other folks here. One of the most notable dabblers in the occult was none other than David Bowie. The androgynous glam icon flirted with Aleister Crowley's teachings during the early 70s. This fascination intensified by his heavy cocaine use, which, hey, cocaine makes everything more interesting.
How could it not?
I mean, yeah. His 1971 song Quicksand directly references Crowley and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, blending mysticism with Bowie's signature sense of existential dread. Then there was the bombastic quartet known as Kiss. With their elaborate makeup and personas, Kiss presented themselves as an ensemble of otherworldly figures. Bassist and vocalist Gene Simmons took on the role of, quote, the demon, breathing fire and spitting blood on stage in a display that revived the old school theatricality and trickery of the old heavy metal acts. Simmons was even claimed to have invented the now iconic two-fingered heavy metal salute, throwing up the horns. While some zealots were quick to label it as a sign of the devil, Simmons insisted it was honestly just the most practical way to wave at fans while holding his bass pick. When you think about it, that kind of actually makes sense.
Yeah, I never knew that. That's fascinating.
Isn't that funny? I had no idea, but it would make sense because if you were trying to hold your pick, you'd probably, that makes total sense.
The most iconic rock and roll salute essentially came out of necessity.
Yeah, it was
just a practical thing.
Yeah, I just think that is so funny. But God, I love this series has been so fun to do because of things like this, where you will learn like a little thing. You're like, that's where that comes from? It's like reading a book on rock and roll history, but through a different lens, through a scary horror occult lens, But you're still learning rock and roll history. It's awesome. But Kiss didn't just stick with stage antics, they were marketing masterminds, these guys. In 1977, they teamed up with Marvel Comics for a series featuring the band as larger-than-life superheroes. To add an extra layer of hype, the comic was advertised as being printed with real blood from the band members themselves. And whether or not that's true, it was a stroke of marketing genius, blending their traditional shock value with clever branding. They've also done like 15 straight-to-DVD Scooby-Doo movies too, I think.
They have?
Yes, they have done like at least one or two, like the Mystery Gang meets Kiss, and Kiss helps them solve a mystery. They've done a few of them, because they've also done a ton with WWE too, like John Cena will be like, and it's all the animated and they'll do like the voices and stuff, but yeah, Kiss.
What a fun crossover.
I know, right? Now, let's talk about another band. Australian rockers, AC/DC. They leaned hard into the devilish aesthetic with their 1979 album Highway to Hell. The cover art showed guitarist Angus Young with horns and a devil's tail, while lead singer Bon Scott sported a pentagram necklace. The album's title track, with its driving rhythm and defiant lyrics, became an anthem for rebellion and was instantly linked to the band's devil-may-care persona. For these bands, the occult was more than a theme, it was the allure. Whether it was Bowie's drug-fueled Crowley fascination, Kiss's fiery theatrics, or AC/DC's devilish branding, the occult gave their music a sense of danger and mystery, and of course rebellion, all of which captivated their fans. Some used it to shock, and others to sell records, but for a generation of rock fans, it was the perfect soundtrack for exploring the darker corners of life. Sometimes it didn't take much to get the fires of rock and roll rumors burning. Oftentimes it was small, offhanded gestures by busy and ambitious musicians, some of them perpetually intoxicated, where all fans needed to whip up their own dark and terrifying urban legends. Like we just said with the pick, with Gene Simmons waving with the pick. Sometimes it's something mundane that is misinterpreted that becomes this whole to-do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's unintentional to start with, but the really plugged in ones take it and run with it.
Right, absolutely. Now, in the massive rock market of the 70s, audiences were craving mystery and rebellion, especially those that were getting tired of disco. The myths spread like wildfire, whether the bands wanted them to or not. Kiss, for example, their hardcore fans, or perhaps even detractors, the band's name was more than just a moniker. They thought it was an acronym for Knights in Satan's Service. Over in Australia, AC/DC wasn't spared from the rumor mill either. Some claimed that AC/DC really stood for Antichrist, Down with Christ, which sounds so lame.
That's a reach.
That's a reach, because we know, like, Knights in Satan's Service, obviously I know that's not what they actually, it's not what KISS stands for, but at least that too has like a mystique to it. Like, this feels like someone forced an acronym. Antichrist, Down with Christ. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard.
It would be like if ABBA stood for All Beelzebub's Blood Ancestors.
Yeah, exactly. And I bet, you know what? You're absolutely right. Jesus Christ.
I never realized.
We need to stop ABBA.
Oh my God.
Dancing Queen? You mean Lilith? So, and the bands, they considered, just like we did, they considered a lot of this shit laughable. Literally. KISS guitarist Ace, Spaceman Fraley, didn't mince words in his 2012 memoir, No Regrets, saying, quote, complete and utter bullshit. On some of our early tours, there were religious fanatics outside the shows burning our records, saying we were devil worshippers. Give me a fucking break. AC/DC's Angus Young, ever the cheeky guitarist, he also dismissed the hysteria, saying, just because you call an album Highway to Hell, you get all kinds of grief. All we'd done was describe what it was like to be on the road for 4 years. When you're sleeping with the lead singer's socks 3 inches from your nose, believe me, that's pretty close to hell. I like that. That was a pretty straight, yeah. There we go, Angus. Oh.
Yeah, it's not a literal highway to hell, it's
a highway to smell.
The highway to smell.
Well, folks, I'd say we're getting close to the end here, and I think we can just wrap this up. Wait a second. What was I thinking? You see, folks, while these bands were all happy to laugh their way to the bank, there was one act in the 70s that became the embodiment of rock and roll's occult fascination.
Black Sabbath.
The English quartet didn't just flirt with the dark arts, they practically invented the genre of occult rock. Sabbath codified the sound, the look, the philosophy of an entire subgenre that could have only emerged during the dark, disillusioned 70s. While others hinted at mysticism, Black Sabbath dove in head first. Their songs didn't shy away from topics like demonology, drug use, despair. They embraced those subjects. From the ominous, doom-laden riff of their self-titled debut track to the haunting balladry of Planet Caravan and the apocalyptic thunder of War Pigs, Black Sabbath delivered a sound and a message that felt utterly unlike anything that had come before. And sure, they weren't the biggest selling band of the decade, and their legacy wasn't free from chaos. By the late 70s, Sabbath's original lineup had disintegrated in a haze of personal conflicts and legal troubles and substance abuse. However, what they lacked in commercial dominance, they made up for in influence. Black Sabbath defined the occult rock and roll era. Their music laid a foundation for a genre and a movement hundreds and arguably thousands of bands owe their existence to, and that is the blueprint of Black Sabbath. Even This Is Spinal Tap, the awesome Christopher Guest movie, the mockumentary, it's a send-up of the excesses of rock music, and clearly it drew inspiration from Sabbath's highs and lows, and supernatural aesthetic. Unlike the Beatles and the Stones, Zeppelin, Cooper, or even the Oyster Cult, no one made the occult as central to their identity as Black Sabbath. Their sound was heavy, baby, and their themes were dark, and their influence was boundless. No one before them was able to marry the occult with music in such a way. In 1969, in the crumbling industrial heart of Birmingham, England, 4 barely out of their teens musicians came together to form a band that would forever change the face of rock and roll. And that was Black Sabbath. And this was comprised of Ozzy Osbourne on vocals, Tony Iommi on guitar, Terry Geezer Butler on bass, and Bill Ward on drums. And they started as just another hopeful act in Britain's club circuit, playing under the name Earth, which is something I didn't know. They were originally named Earth. And apparently, at this time at least, they were no prodigies, nor were they really wildly original, but they were determined. In a way, that to me sounds like a punk rock ethos. They're not even exactly the best musicians, but they have this charisma and this drive that just captivates people. But they were determined and they were desperate for their big break. And that break came in the form of a riff. Tony Iommi, the quiet, brooding guitarist of the group, stumbled onto something that would become the foundation of Sabbath's signature sound and the birth of heavy metal itself. It wasn't the typical bluesy progression that dominated rock music at the time. Oh, no. It was something entirely different. Gage, maybe you can shed a little more light on this. The riff was a 3-note sequence: G, an octave G, and an eerie dissonant C sharp. It included a flattened 5th note of the major scale, a musical interval so unsettling that medieval composers had nicknamed it Diabolus in Musica, the devil in music. And Gage, could you please give us a sample of that right now?
Absolutely.
Oh. Now, Gage, before we continue, can you explain, what is it about that collection of notes?
So, essentially, obviously, you got the G and the G above it, which is just an octave higher. But that dissonant C sharp is really what gives it that eerie quality. Typically, from a G, a D would be the 5th above it. This is what you would hear in a power chord. You will hear the root note and the 5th above it. But the C sharp is a half step under that, making it quite a bit more dissonant.
Wow. Okay. I can understand why. And I can also understand why centuries earlier, liturgical composers, they warned against using this in choral works. Kind of like what we were talking with Wagner's Devil's Note in part 1. Especially when it came to religious music, it was very frowned upon. It was not so much, though, the fear of satanic influence, but because its discordant tone created a sense of unease and tension. For Black Sabbath, that was exactly the point. Ozzy Osbourne recalls in his 2001 book, he came to rehearsal one day and said, "Isn't it funny how people pay money to watch horror films? Why don't we start playing scary music?" And then he came up with that Black Sabbath riff, which was the scariest riff I've ever heard in my life. Iommi's riff wasn't just scary, baby, it was heavy. His detuned guitar slackened to accommodate the tips of 2 fingers he'd lost in a factory accident, gave the notes a sludgy, ominous weight. Combined with Geezer Butler's brooding bass lines and Bill Ward's pounding drums, the sound was raw, primal, and utterly unique. Before Ozzy even laid down the first lyric, the essence of Sabbath had been forged. That's interesting. I didn't know that about the guy's fingers.
I didn't either.
That is really fascinating.
Which, somewhat more simplistic playing style, it kind of makes sense, and that's such a creative solution. A lot of times creativity comes out of limitations, and I think that's a great example of that.
Right, exactly. Well, legend has it that Iommi's inspiration to play scary music came from watching the 1964 Boris Karloff film Black Sabbath. While the movie, an Italian horror anthology, leaned more toward campy thrills than it did bone-chilling terror, It supposedly planted that seed for the band's haunting musical direction. But the real occult undercurrent of Sabbath's music came from Geezer Butler. I'd expect that from a guy named Geezer.
I mean, most butlers are geezers.
They are, except Austin Butler. Butler, raised in what he later described as a, quote, severe Catholic household, sounds pleasant, had always been drawn to the darker side of spirituality. As a young man, he began exploring witchcraft and sorcery, mysticism, devouring material like Man, Myth, and Magic and Aleister Crowley's writings and the lurid novels of Dennis Wheatley, such as The Devil Rides Out and To the Devil a Daughter. His fascination creeped into his personal life and his lyrics. He admitted, quote, "I was seeing all kinds of things at the time, and not through drugs." He painted his flat black, adorned it with inverted crosses, and steeped himself in occult imagery. But one particular incident shook him to his core. Butler recalls the incident saying, quote, "Ozzy gave me this 16th century book about magic that he'd stolen from somewhere. I put it in the cupboard because I wasn't sure about it. Later that night, I woke up and saw this black shadow at the end of the bed. I ran to the airing cupboard to throw the book out, but the book had disappeared. It scared me shitless." That fear was, of course, raw, visceral, and it lingered, and it infused with the verses that Butler wrote for the band. Combined with Iommi's riffs and Osbourne's eerie, howling vocals, Sabbath's music became the audible equivalent of a nightmare. It wasn't just rock, baby, it was doom. It was despair and darkness in sonic form. And from the moment they played that first terrifying riff, Sabbath became more than a band. They were the architects of a new genre, and one that would ripple through the decades and inspire legions of musicians. Between 1970's groundbreaking Black Sabbath and 1978's Never Say Die, the original lineup of Sabbath delivered a musical and visual portrayal of demonism and the supernatural, unlike anything their medium had ever seen. Their work carved out a dark and unsettling corner in rock and roll, one that blended the themes of cosmic evil with despair, rebellion, and even the occasional touch of humanity. Not every song in Sabbath's catalog was scary and occultish. They also tackled drug abuse, paranoia, loneliness, and even space travel. Tracks like Changes revealed a haunting vulnerability, and while the humanist tones of Under the Sun and the anti-war classics War Pigs and Electric Funeral added depth to their fearsome image, but a significant portion of their music was openly concerned with the shadowy forces that meddled in human affairs. Terrifying anthems like Black Sabbath, The Wizard, and NIB defined their signature sound and painted vivid pictures of otherworldly menace. Songs like Sabbath Bloody Sabbath and Super Tsar drove home their dark reputation, while surprisingly pro-Christian After Forever hinted at a more nuanced worldview than their critics expected, which is something I didn't know, because I'm not like a huge Sabbath fan. I don't so other than like the major tunes, I don't really know a lot. So I did not know that. That was pretty interesting.
I didn't either. That is surprising.
Yeah. Even in later years, as the band's lineup shifted and vocalists came and went, Sabbath continued their exploration of the eerie and the divine with tracks like Heaven and Hell, Lady Evil, and Die Young. Bassist Geezer Butler once told Rolling Stone in 1971, "We live in a satanic world. The devil's more in control now. People can't come together. There's no equality." And that part really I was like, you know what? You're right. Why be afraid of the devil in music when it's clear that, say you're non-religious. Let's even just take bad stuff. Why are you so evil? Let's say evil. Let's just say evil. Why are you so concerned about evil coming from media, whether it be films or music or books, when it's clear evil's already taken over? You know what I mean? It's not like...
It's already pervasive.
It's already pervasive. It's infused into every aspect of our life. We see it every day. Yeah, I thought that was actually an interesting point. It's like, why are you so concerned about the devil with our music when it's clear the devil's already taken over.
Yeah, and if you are religious, you obviously don't have to take part in it. So you're
Right.
safe from the devil in that sense. And if you're worried about the corruption of the children, well, doesn't everything happen according to God's plan? By
Right.
the Christian worldview? So there's really nothing to worry about on either side.
Right, there you go. Absolutely. So, when it comes to their album covers, Sabbath looked every bit as ominous as their music. Their debut Black Sabbath featured a cloaked greenish figure standing near an old watermill at dusk, a haunting image that perfectly matched the doom-laden riff of its title track. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath depicted a nightmare, a sleeper consumed by demons. Sabotage offered something surreal, a mirror that refused to reflect. And then there was the inverted cross. The inner sleeve of their debut album featured one, daring the religious right to come for them. The band's winged devil logo became an iconic emblem, a stamp of infernal authority that adorned their merchandise and imagery for decades. And by the time they released their 1976 compilation, We Sold Our Souls for Rock and Roll, Sabbath's reputation as rock's premier purveyors of darkness was already long cemented. Their aesthetic, though, didn't stop at their albums, the band themselves. They looked the part, baby. All four members wore crucifix necklaces in promotional photos, a detail that could either signal maybe it's like a protection, they're wearing it as protection, or are they wearing it in the blasphemous sense? Like, you would think, though, if they were doing that, they'd wear it upside down, but who knows? It's kind of like glass half full, half empty sort of thing.
Sure. It's all about perspective.
Exactly. Tony Iommi even customized his guitar fretboards with tiny crosses. Early TV appearances only added to their mystique, as one infamous clip saw them performing Paranoid against a nightmarish backdrop of an androgynous, coal-eyed face, creating a visual as haunting as their sound. And of course, there were the band photos. 4 unsmiling men, shrouded by massive curtains of hair, staring out with a mixture of menace and mystery. They weren't trying to look approachable. They were daring you to step into their world where demons walk and darkness reigned. Black Sabbath wasn't just a band, baby. They were an experience. They were a phenomenon that reshaped the landscape of rock music. And their unflinching embrace of the occult, both musically and visually, made them the ultimate pioneers of heavy metal's dark heart. In fact, one might even call them the heavy metal Mephistopheles. At the time, a lot of critics, of course, hated their music. Lester Bangs, famed rock journalist, dismissed them as, quote, sub-Zeppelin cosmic behemoth, and the Village Voice critic Robert Christgau sneered at their debut, saying, the worst of the counterculture on a plastic platter. Another critic said about as pleasurable an experience as a Gestapo interrogation. Jesus Christ, that is deadly. Man. But it wasn't even the church that spooked the band the most. It was their own fans. Iommi actually recounted one particularly weird encounter, saying, quote, one night, after finishing a show, we returned to the hotel and found the corridor leading to our rooms completely filled with people wearing black cloaks, sitting on the floor with candles in their hands, chanting, ah. He goes on to say, we climbed over them to get to our rooms, but we could still hear them chanting, so we synchronized our watches, opened our doors at the same time, blew out the candles and sang happy birthday to them. Pissed them off. You wouldn't believe some of the letters we received and some of the people that have turned up. And like we said, a lot of it was just a gimmick. And in fact, none of them were believers in Satanism themselves. Iommi would even say, we like the idea of what's beyond, but as an interest. Certainly in no way as the practice of such, and that's as far as it went, really. And Geezer Butler even said, I've done interviews with Christian papers where if I'm talking about how much I respect Jesus, they'll say, but you can't possibly respect Jesus. You wouldn't be in a rock and roll band if you did. But for millions of fans, whether or not Sabbath believed in their dark mystique, Their awesome songs made all of that irrelevant. It was the music that mattered, their riffs, their lyrics, and their terrifying imagery. Sabbath brought the occult to the masses, making it an immediate presence in their headphones and on their t-shirts and in their concert halls. And of course, the occult wasn't the only game in rock and roll during the 60s and 70s. There was folk, there was punk, there was reggae, and soul all thrived alongside the darker currents of rock. But for a particular slice of the baby boomer generation, those who were teenagers and 20-somethings at the time, the occult was nearly a cultural phenomenon delivered directly to them through the wonders of rock and roll. So to wrap things up, folks, from 1968 to 1973, the Stones toyed with satanic themes, from Their Satanic Majesty's Request to Sympathy for the Devil. Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven became a generational anthem, and Alice Cooper dominated the airwaves and tabloids from 72 to 75. Kiss made shock rock mainstream, and Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper cracked the top 10 in 1976, and AC/DC's Highway to Hell became a rock staple. Even the Beatles couldn't escape the occult's reach. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with Aleister Crowley lurking on the cover sold over 20 million copies worldwide, subtly planting Crowley's face in millions of homes, whether they knew it or not. And Black Sabbath, well, they stood at the epicenter of it all, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006. Sabbath has sold over 75 million albums worldwide. From their 2013 comeback record, 13, kicked off with the chilling single, God is Dead. For many, Sabbath's music wasn't just sound, it was an experience and a gateway to a darker, mysterious world. And it wasn't even the young who felt the pull to the occult. As the baby boomers grew older and turned down their radios, they actually found the themes of mystery, spirituality, and rebellion that they'd first encountered in rock music were quietly reshaping society at large. Their elders, those who had once dismissed these ideas, were undergoing their own spiritual transformations. The occult wasn't just a passing fad, it had become a reflection of a changing cultural and spiritual landscape, forever intertwined with the power chords and the haunting lyrics of rock's darkest era. And folks, that is essentially going to wrap us up, but, of course, it just kept going. I mean, I can remember, Gage, I'm sure you can too, in the 90s, I can remember seeing images of Marilyn Manson like burning a Bible and it scaring the hell out of me. In fact, funny story, maybe I already said this, forgive me if I did, but in 2015, me and our Uncle Chris, we went and saw the Pumpkins in Chicago, and opening was Marilyn Manson. This was 2015. Even in and of course, there came a part in the show where he burned a Bible. And I remember thinking even then, and like this was a decade ago, thinking, it's kind of passé now. Like it's not really that shocking. Like the more yes, if you're, I could see how it would be offensive, but it's not shocking. It doesn't like, like it might have in the 90s, because I can remember in the 90s, he essentially, for a lot of parents in small towns and stuff, was the Antichrist. He was scary. And of course, Lil Nas X, even today, in that he's, giving the devil a lap dance. Even now, we still use satanic imagery as it's a way of evoking a certain feeling. And Lil Nas X did it exquisitely. I can remember online, parents getting all pissed off. And it just shows you that a great performer, whether it's Lil Nas X or Ozzy, or they can take something like that and make it larger than life. But sometimes, folks, they claim, many of them, to have had real encounters. In fact, I think we shared this once. This was on a bonus. We shared this on a Patreon bonus episode. You folks may have heard this before, but we're going to play a 3-minute clip for you right now of Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins describing a strange encounter he had while on the Howard Stern show. Let's hear it.
What happened? Give me a for instance. I want to know.
I'm turning red. I'm so embarrassed.
No, don't be embarrassed. Come on, share. Why not? We have to discuss these things.
Let's just say I was with somebody once and I saw a transformation that I can't explain.
The person transformed into something other than human.
Yes, I saw it.
Were you on drugs?
I was not. I was totally sober.
Wow.
You were talking with. I'm asking you some questions. If you were talking to someone,
Yes.
and you're having a conversation
Yes.
like we are now,
Yeah.
this close, and the person suddenly, not in a hallucination, they said to you, "Look, something's going to happen here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to morph into something else," and you're like, "This is ridiculous."
That's not how it happened.
Give me a please. I
No, it
want
was
to see this.
Imagine you're doing something and suddenly you turn around and there's somebody else standing there.
A different human.
Sorta. It's hard to explain without going into detail. I'd rather not go into details.
Okay, but did you say to the person, "What'd you just do here? That's not
Yes,
you."
and they acknowledged it.
And what did they say they were? From another planet?
And they wouldn't explain.
Why not?
Again, without telling the story, it's a really messed up story.
A famous person?
No.
Good. Why
Well,
is he
wait
not
a
famous?
minute.
By the way,
Why is that good?
Believe it or not, they're
why don't you put him on wrestling?
Believe it or not, they're actually a voting member of the Rock and Roll Academy.
Is that true?
I'm just.
It's Jan Wenner, isn't it?
But when you say they transformed into someone else or something
I mean, Billy,
else,
I've had that happen.
I'm being vague on purpose.
I was
so
with a woman once. She took her makeup off. I didn't know who the fuck she was. I'm telling you, she totally tricked me. You talk about something like that, that's a different story. Wow. I mean,
It's up there with one of the most intense things I've ever been through. I will tell you the story.
you will.
Yeah. And I will say,
Go ahead.
since we're on radio,
Thank you.
that the story is even more fantastical than you think.
wow.
Can you give us something?
I'm going to tell you in
Please,
private.
Billy, just give me something. Please, I want to make news again with you. Just give me some element of it to tickle me, to get me ready. If this was a movie trailer, when you saw the shapeshifter, something.
The person was naked.
A man?
The person was naked.
Big cock? How many inches? I hope it was a woman. Wait a second. Were you in bed with the shapeshifter? Were you making
I will
love?
tell you in confidence.
Holy mackerel. Now I'm with you. It was a woman. You made love to her.
Haven't we all experienced this?
Did you? Oh, believe me, I've been with people who shapeshifted, right? But their personalities, they were completely different people before and after. Are you saying it was a lover who actually
I
shapeshifted?
can no longer discuss this.
All right. Wow. Who do you think it is, James? You would know if you give me a guess. Who do you think it is?
I have no idea.
Should we commit him?
My. You know, first of all, if you notice, Billy seems to insinuate that it was someone he had just slept with. He said we were naked, and Howard even asked him, "Did you sleep with this person?" And also, by the way, that clip is put together, I think the first half is from one visit, and then the second half is when he visited again, and Stern was like, "Come on, you got to give me more." And I just cut them and put them together. So just so people know, that clip is actually 2 separate episodes. I mean, he makes it sound so literally, it sounds like almost like reptilian or a shapeshifter thing. He says he literally turned around and the person he had been talking to, he just says was something else. He doesn't go into detail. He just says they became something else. And Howard Stern asked him, he said, "Did you say, hey, what did you just do?" And he goes, "Yes." And they acknowledged it, which is it. So it wasn't like Billy saw something he wasn't supposed to see and they're like, "Oh shit." It acknowledged what he saw. That to me is pretty fascinating. Another story, which was pretty fascinating for Billy Corgan, and I've looked all over for this. He said this in an interview. I'm almost certain he did. And I've looked everywhere for it, and I'll share it again. But he shared a great story where he was in his office one night. His wife was I think, in the kitchen, making dinner, and he was busy writing his memoir that he's been writing for years now. But he had just finished a long portion that was about his mother that was kind of difficult for him to, his mother died when he was young, and, it was kind of difficult for him to write, but he finally got it on the page, right? All of a sudden, the power goes out, and he didn't save that portion. The power just flickered, though. It was enough that it shut off the computer, but then it came back on. In his mind, he's more concerned with like, I just wrote like pages that I just lost, and he gets up and he runs to the kitchen to tell his wife, oh my God, you're not going to believe what just happened. But when he gets there, he can just tell immediately his wife has a look on her face. He's like, honey, what's wrong? She goes, I saw a woman walk by the kitchen through the living room and just vanish. And he goes, she didn't acknowledge me. It was like she was just passing through, and she described what this woman looked like. And Billy was like, that sounds like my mother. And it's funny. It's almost like he wrote something maybe she didn't want published. And it was like her way of saying, no, no, no.
Yeah, like as soon as he finishes it up, she's like, oh God, he had to write that part. No, this is no
right.
Good. No, I don't want that out there. No.
Right. So anyway, folks, that is going to wrap it up. I mean, wow, a 3-part series. That was our first 3-part series in Creep Street history.
Yeah, and I think definitely needed to be. We covered so much, and it was all fascinating.
Oh, man, that was so fun to do, fun to research. Gage, thank you for all the work you've done producing and editing and soundscaping the whole thing. Like, your work, it's just clear. Like, and we've had people message us and stuff, and it's clear, like, the sound of the show alone just sounds, it's got just a great sound to it. And that's you, baby. That's all Gage, folks. So happy to have him on board.
Well, it all starts with your research and your amazing performance and delivery of the material. So I wouldn't be able to do it without a great starting point and a foundation. So I appreciate everything you do, my friend.
Sounds like we need each other.
It certainly does.
I think that's what it is.
We made a pact.
We made a pact, a Faustian pact. All right, folks, but I'll tell you what. I got a list of names who I bet don't fear the Reaper.
Oh, yeah? Who's that?
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bone Breaker Bex Gray, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vieren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, that's right, folks. If you want to be like that illustrious list of names, if you want to join the Hall of Greatness of the Creep Street Elite, head on over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. Oh man, this just felt so good. Thank you, Gage, so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. This was a ton of fun.
It was. Folks, we're so happy to have you with us. We hope you enjoy it. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night and goodbye.